There are videos in this series that I've set up, and it's been very quick and very easy. And I've gone, I've got a lot of empty space. Montreal is not one of those teams. When you're talking about all-time greats, and you're talking about the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Canadiens, the most successful franchise in the NHL's long history, and it predates the NHL. They were successful in the NHA as well, which they then had to change to the NHL to get rid of Livingstone. But that's a whole other video for a whole other time. So they're all-time leaders, they're all-time greats. Yeah, there are so many. There really are so many. And I really, in all honesty, trying to pick one or two, or hey, here's the all-time best. Good luck. Now, Guy Lafleur's going to get a lot of support that way with 1,246 points and 728 assists. Leader in both categories, but in the goals category, Maurice Richard with 544. He was the first player to hit 500 goals, and at the time he retired, that 544, I'm sure, looked similar to hockey fans to how we look at the Gretzky record currently. Penalty minutes, Chris Nilan, one of the toughest Montreal Canadiens ever, 2,248 penalty minutes, which is why it was odd when he went over and played for Boston, because a lot of those penalty minutes were spent punching Boston Bruins. Power play goals, and Quebec Nordiques. Jean Beliveau, 173 power play goals, and those are some all-time greats. Nilan, not an all-time great on the ice as a scorer by any stretch, but in the toughness category, yeah, absolutely. And they've had their share of tough players in Montreal. See John Ferguson as a good example. Now, in the all-time greats category, you got Larry Robinson, right? You got Cournoyer, Lemaire, Shutt. And Shutt, who I've done a video on before, great career that was a little bit too short, in all honesty. Probably should have gone on longer. Boom Boom Geoffrion, of course. Yep. Saku Koivu was around for a long time during years after Montreal is no longer a Stanley Cup champion, but still Koivu there for a long time and was their captain for a long while. Locke, Dickie Moore is on the board as well. Guy Lapointe, Peter Mahovlich, technically Frank Mahovlich was there as well, though not for as long. Toe Blake, Aurel Joliat, Howie Morenz, sorry. Bob Gainey, Guy Carbonneau, Serge Savard, and the list goes on and on and on. I know, Chris Chelios, yep, sure, yep, You can just keep going. There are so many great players who've played for the Montreal Canadiens to the point where this is why Montreal Canadiens fans are seen as spoiled, and the media as well, because this was a level that they got used to. And then over the last 15, 20 years, things have been different. But while things have been different, they've still managed to, put some good teams on the ice and have some nice little runs and tease the Montreal Canadiens fan base into thinking maybe this is the time they get over the top. And part of the reason why is Carey Price. He leads them in all-time wins with 348. Save percentage, Ken Dryden's got that with a 922 save percentage. When we talk about the greatest goaltenders of all time, we don't talk enough about Ken Dryden. Ken Dryden's career was short, and that was by his own design. He decided, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to get a career and do something else. And he left while he was still at the top of his game, which is admirable. And there was one season that he took the year off, and Montreal was like, well, fine, we don't need you. And then they didn't do well in the playoffs, and they went, we really need that Dryden guy. And so Ken Dryden's place in history be a lot. He'd be remembered as one of the all-time greats if he'd played longer. The Stanley Cups are there, but part of what obscures his place is that those Montreal Canadiens teams were so dominant that people would look and go, yeah, they got there with Dryden, but it really didn't matter. Look, I got Lafleur and all these other guys. Henri Richard, who I don't even have on the board as one of the all-time greats because I got Maurice Richard over here, so I forgot to put down Henri Richard. Like, there were so many greats who played for Montreal throughout the 70s that it's easy to overlook Ken Dryden. Shots against, Carey Price has faced the most shots, 20,252. Hainsworth leads the team in all-time shutouts with 75. So there's some greats on the board there. Not on the board, Patrick Roy. Patrick Roy's not on the board. Jacques Plante, not on the board either, and they are two of the greatest goaltenders of all time. Bill Durnan, Charlie Hodge, Georges Vezina, yes, the one the trophy's named after. Gump Worsley, Rogie Vachon. Easy to forget that Vachon was a Montreal Canadien and won 3 Stanley Cups for the Montreal Canadiens as well. Went 7-1 in one playoff with I think like a 1.69 goals against average. Just ridiculously good. But again, people could look at that and go, well, yeah, but look at the team that he was on. So it is really, really difficult to come up with all-time greats for Montreal without missing somebody. So if I missed somebody, I know Andre Rasico's not on the board, and I apologize, but I had to cut things off somewhere. So, best team, I went with the obvious choice, which was the 76-77 Montreal Canadiens. That team had 8 losses in the regular season. 8. That's it. They were 12-2 in the playoffs as well. So this was a team that just steamrolled to a Stanley Cup. They also had 132 points that year, which was and is a record. So 132 points, pretty impressive season, steamrolling to the Stanley Cup. And yeah, that was the greatest. And not only that, but they had 24 straight seasons in the playoffs from 1971 to 1994. So what's interesting is they win the Cup in 93, and by 95 they're out of the playoffs. And that's where the turmoil starts, and we see a lot of turnover. Most wins versus any one franchise. Hey, here's one for you guys who've been watching the channel for a while. Montreal versus Boston's a bad matchup for Boston. You guys pay attention. 363 regular season wins against the Boston Bruins. I can only assume they have 363 against them in the playoffs as well. Now, points percentage. That's where, again, Vegas. Teams in the East, some teams have really got Vegas figured out. 833 winning percentage against Vegas. But if the team's name starts with a V, Montreal's got it covered. 723 winning percentage against Vancouver. Yeah, as a Canuck fan, absolutely checks out. So again, for Montreal fans who say, why is Shannon so salty against the Montreal Canadiens? I present to you Boston and Vancouver. They win the most against Vancouver on average, and they score the most against Boston. Goals for, however, or they win the most overall against Boston. Goals for, it's Toronto. So Toronto, 2,286 goals against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Boston was second on that list. I think it was 2,235. Now, goals for per game against Vegas, they're scoring 4.17. They don't see what all the hype's about with Vegas Golden Knights. They can beat them all the time. And against Arizona, 4.05. That will include the Winnipeg Jets before they move to Arizona. So they do well against those two teams. Again, they're Western teams. Now, goals against per game, Winnipeg. So Winnipeg, who was Atlanta, 2.28 goals against per game. So that's interesting that Arizona and Winnipeg both show up on the board. The former Jets and the current Jets. I guess if the team's name is Jets, Montreal goes, okay, we're going to beat up on Winnipeg tonight, are we? So, yeah, 2.28 goals against per game. Now, notable captains, again, there are so many. Koivu, absolutely. Pierre Turgeon, and I've got Turgeon as well under, he was a Hab. Turgeon wasn't with Montreal for very long. Now, if you're a Habs fan, you'll totally remember he was captain, and there was a lot of turmoil around the team at that time. But it's easy to lose that in Turgeon's career. Guy Carbonneau, Bob Gainey. It was unfair when you had Gainey and Carbonneau both on the team. Just picture if the Boston Bruins had 2 Bergerons. That's basically what you had. Yvon Cournoyer, Henri Richard, Jean Beliveau, Maurice Richard, Toe Blake. Toe Blake, who's one of the all-time greats, was a captain. And by the way, we're going to talk about him when we get to the coaching part of things. Butch Bouchard, who's in the Hall of Fame and has a great name. Silvio Mantha and Newsy Lalonde was their first. Really, in all honesty, the greats for the Montreal Canadiens, it is a really, really, really long list. And I could probably fill up 2 boards and still have guys that aren't on the board that probably should be. So, the Montreal Canadiens and their all-time greatness, and if anybody's wondering, well, where's Brendan Gallagher? Gallagher's not in this category. Gallagher is as good as he is. He's not in this category. This is like all-time absolute greats of the game. So, for their best coach, yeah, it's a pick'em. You can go with Toe Blake, Scotty Bowman, or Dick Irvin. A lot of Stanley Cups won by these guys. A lot. And so, to me, pick them. In all honesty. I would go with probably Toe Blake, but Scotty Bowman had the better winning percentage. And Dick Irvin kind of, was an idol at the time when he was coach of the Montreal Canadiens. Like, any of the three works. Really, in all honesty, any of the three works. GM Sam Pollock. I'm going with Sam Pollock. I know Bergevin fans are like, really not Bergevin? Sorry, I'm going with Sam Pollock. He put together that team in the '70s that decimated the NHL. So he would have been behind the Guy Lafleur trade with the California Seals that showed they didn't really want a team in Oakland. And there was numerous other robberies committed by the Montreal Canadiens during that stage, and they got pretty dirty with it too. They made sure that LA got a little bit better at the deadline so they could keep that number one draft pick that would be Guy Lafleur. So, because the Kings were right down there with the Golden Seals, and they're like, if we make the Kings a little bit better, that'd be good for them and great for us. And then they got Lafleur. So Montreal, it's a really interesting long history of greatness. Now, when we get into he was a Hab, honestly, the weird thing with Montreal is, as long as they've been around, partly because of the amount of championships you're looking at, there's a lot of stability. You don't see a lot of guys coming through Montreal for a short period of time who are thought of as great players elsewhere. And that continued throughout the 80s. I remember, looking at hockey annuals and yearbooks and saying, Montreal doesn't really trade players very often. There's not a whole lot of turnover. They leave things as they are, and they kind of have faith in their franchise, which is good. That's a good thing. Now, we've gone to the other extreme now in the NHL where there just aren't very many big trades made, and there aren't very many trades you go, wow, that really turned that team around. There's just, here's your standard 3 or 4 different trading varieties, and there isn't really that big hockey trade made very often anymore. But Montreal would if they made that trade, they make it in the offseason. You wouldn't usually come during the season. He was a Hab. I have Andy Moog because I think of Moog more as a Bruin and as an Oiler. And I remember when he went to Montreal, and I'm like, that doesn't look right. Doesn't look right. Sorry, that just doesn't look right. And it didn't feel right because then I'm cheering for Moog, but I'm a Bruins fan, and he's wearing a Habs jersey, and it's not right. Tony Esposito started his career as a Montreal Canadien. Of course, he's known as Chicago Blackhawks, arguably greatest goaltender of all time. Gino Odjick. Gino played in Montreal, and that was weird as well. I mean, he was a Canuck, and he was an Islander, but when he was in Montreal, I don't know, it didn't work for me. Glenn Sather, yes, the former bench boss for the Edmonton Oilers, I should say, was a Montreal Canadian. Daniel Briere, Doug Gilmour, Mr. Maple Leaf, he was a member of the Montreal Canadiens. And Trevor Linden, Mr. Canuck, he was a member of the Montreal Canadiens. And, of course, as mentioned before, Pierre Turgeon, who, again, if you followed his whole career, you likely know, well, he spent 104 games in Montreal, but it's a small enough portion that you could be forgiven for forgetting that he was a member of the Montreal Canadiens. And it was a lot shorter than expected. When he went to Montreal, it was, this is great, a really good French-Canadian player, and they can build around him, and make him captain. He's gone. Yeah, that was how Montreal did things at that point. So, the Montreal Canadiens, the all-time greats, I am sure there are many names being left off the board that people can make mention of, especially from the distant past, where there are a lot of other legendary names that get thrown in there, and it is an intimidating list. And it has to be intimidating for current Montreal Canadiens. You are fighting this history. Every time you go out on the ice, that's what you have hanging over you. And it's great. I mean, it's a great motivator, but at the same time, it just has to be intimidating. To be like, how many cups did this team win? Really? 24? Well, it's only 23 in the NHL, right? Oh, I can't say that? Okay. All right. 24 it is then. All right. So there you go. The all-time greats and the greatest of the Montreal Canadiens. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. Do remember, stay home if you can, stay safe, and wash your hands. I will talk to you again soon.